Extremely frustrating to return from the doctor with your child unwell with no clear diagnosis. Well, one charity believes that some children, in rare cases, could have a faulty immune response to a viral infection which can affect the brain. The condition is called PANS and PANDAS, and some GPs and parents are calling for more research to better understand how to treat it. Catherine Nash has been speaking to families and just a warning that some details in her report are upsetting.
Brought on after a blood test, convinced there was still a needle in her arm. This distressing episode didn't end quickly. It lasted for 10 hours. For Avalie Gillette, flare-ups like this were a daily occurrence. When she was 9, she had a stomach bug, but within 24 hours of becoming unwell, she suddenly developed extreme OCD.
She woke up the next morning just consumed completely. So she'd touch the door to open it and she would be there for 2 or 3 hours, having to keep on touching different parts of it and sometimes literally climbing the walls because she had to touch higher and higher.
And there's this voice inside which you can't get away, and it's there for hours and hours, and if you try and go away it makes you panic, and it's just really awful, and I can't describe it. It's just really sad
And upsetting.
Avalie's
GP referred her to Child Mental Health Services, but while waiting to be seen, her symptoms got worse.
She started also having delusions as well, where she would see, generally it was things like spiders, so she would see them around the house, she would see them on her. We had a few situations where she thought she was absolutely covered, and so she spent about 2-3 hours clawing at her skin. She started self-harming. So she would have intrusive thoughts. We're driving down the road, she would try and jump out the car, and she became suicidal, didn't want to live anymore. If life was going to be like that, she would beg me every night, make it so I don't wake up. Yeah, it was very tough times.
Avalie was almost sectioned until her mum learned about a condition affecting children called PANS and PANDAS. PANS is an acronym for Paediatric Acute Onset Neuropsychiatric Syndrome, which is associated with a variety of different infections, whereas PANDAS is a disorder associated with only streptococcal infection. Both can result in a sudden onset of obsessive-compulsive disorder, motor tics, restricting food, and severe anxiety. But despite these symptoms and the fact that some patients have had good results from being treated with antibiotics and ibuprofen, PANS-PANDAS is still not recognised by the NHS.
I wouldn't be surprised if PANS-PANDAS are not actually touched upon in many medical schools. There is a reluctance to accept that such a condition may exist because we haven't been able to find a biomarker, a test which actually confirms the diagnosis. I think it goes against the grain for a lot of GPs to make a diagnosis which you cannot prove with an investigation, and then actually give antibiotics when you can't necessarily find an evidence of infection.
After months of battling with her illness, Avalie Gillette was formally diagnosed as having PANS by a neurologist and immunologist. Within days of being given antibiotics, the extreme symptoms she'd been experiencing subsided.
Yeah, I could be myself again. I knew how to play with my friends again. I could get into classes. I wasn't missing out a lot of my life, which was great. So, yeah.
Campaigners are fighting to get better awareness of PANS and PANDAS across the board. They've even been discussing it in Parliament. More understanding could help children receive treatment faster so they can rebuild their lives. Catherine Nash, 5 News.
Well, in a statement, NHS England told 5 News that while NICE does not currently endorse any treatment for PANS and the World Health Organisation does not recognise the condition at all patients get the support they need in line with existing recommended national guidance. I'm joined now by MP Ruth Cadbury, who's been campaigning for more awareness, and Georgia Tuckey, chair of the PANDAS UK charity. Good evening to you both. George, if I can put the response we got from NHS England, if I could put that to you. According to them, they recognise that indeed PANDAS is not recognised as a condition, but they say all patients get the right support that they need. Is that something that you've seen?
Absolutely not, no. And I think it's important to point out that PANDAS is actually recognised by the World Health Organisation. PANS, unfortunately, at this stage isn't. So, you know, what we would call to action is NHSE, British Paediatric Neurological Association and the Royal College of Psychiatrists to come together to discuss the conditions and the best way forward in terms of treating them.
Ruth, you've got very involved in this. You are really trying to push that this is recognised according to what Georgia and families and patients have told her. What have you found out about this? What are you trying to push for, and how are you trying to push it to get it properly recognised?
When I got into this, I chair the all-party parliamentary group on PANDAS, was because a family who are my constituents told me about what had happened with their children and the fight they had had to, first of all, get a diagnosis and then to get treatment. And unfortunately, or fortunately for them, they could afford to pay for treatment, but so many families affected, they can't afford it. So we're working with Georgia and PANDAS UK to raise the issue in Parliament, but also to keep plugging away with the health ministers. And, you know, we've had some sympathetic responses. So we're moving towards clinical recognition. Well, at least I hope we are, because once we do, and we move from the current figure of only 48% of paediatricians have ever heard of PANDAS to all paediatricians, both having heard of it, but then having the wherewithal to treat it, then I think we'll be in a much better situation, and we won't see those traumatic scenes that you showed at the beginning of this section.
And Georgia, can you explain a little further how much so, when there isn't that diagnosis, how much it can worsen the symptoms of the condition?
Well, the children generally continue down the sort of disease route and develop further symptoms. So the primary presenting symptoms would be OCD, involuntary movements or severe eating restrictions, and they progress and worsen. Often they're identified as being pure psychiatric conditions and referred to child and adolescent mental health services, and of course there are tremendous waiting times. When in actual fact, in these cases, a very simple treatment such as antibiotics, which you heard in regards to Avalie and Catherine, antibiotics and sometimes ibuprofen actually can completely resolve the symptoms if they're caught early enough.
Ruth, where do you see this going? Do you believe your campaign that you're pushing for, do you really believe that we can somehow get to a point where this could be properly recognised here?
Well, I really do hope so. I mean, it took some years, but we eventually, in this country, recognised and started to treat ME. And the crazy thing is, PANDAS, these syndromes are so easy to treat, especially if caught early on, as Georgia said. Just a simple course of amoxicillin, which is what we gave our children for ear infections and throat infections. And that must save so much money down the line. It means these children are not missing school or going into special school. It means families are not being broken up or missing work. And, you know, the cost, the net cost of the taxpayer is massive. If only that we could get recognition and an appropriate detection, diagnosis and treatment accepted and acknowledged and delivered through the NHS, so that all children affected benefit.
Ruth Cadbury, thank you so much for sharing and raising awareness in this, and Georgia Tuckey, really good talking to you both. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Well, if you've been affected by these issues, you can find help on the PANDAS website. That's on your screen right now. And help on many mental health issues can be found on various websites. The one for the charity Mind is also on your screen now. OK, still to come on 5 News tonight. The photo exhibition immortalising girls on the